Hi guys, I'm Mark and I have Lina Seiche here with me. Maybe a podcast record by now. I don't know how many times you've been here. You're a Bitcoin influencer and recently you've become a coffee influencer too. You know the president of El Salvador personally. Today we're of course talking about the bull run. We're talking about Bitcoin. I read earlier from you that you said it feels right. So you obviously mentioned Bitcoin and you also touched on El Salvador. So what exactly did you mean by that? Are we now entering a phase where we can really sit back and say, I told you so? I think we can enjoy it a bit, right? That is, what exactly did you mean by that?
So is this the phase where we can really sit back and say, I told you so? I think we can enjoy it a bit, right? Or not. But what I posted was a comparison of two Fortune articles about El Salvador's Bitcoin trial, because things are going really well. Wow, that was pretty smart. And we Bitcoiners clearly saw this coming. El Salvador entered at the beginning of the bear market, struggled, and now things improved. They had to deal with a media storm of articles that misunderstood or didn't want to understand the point. And we Bitcoiners saw this coming, as we knew it would be tough at first, as El Salvador entered at the beginning of the bear market, struggled for 2 years, and now things improved. For 2 years, they faced a media misunderstanding. Ultimately, time is our strongest argument. So for 2 years, they had to deal with a media bombardment of articles that just completely misunderstood or didn't want to understand the whole point of it. And at the end of the day, strongest argument as Bitcoiners is time. Over time, most conversations settle down. And what's happening right now with El Salvador?
Yes, and it's really not just the case with El Salvador. I mean, it's basically the same theme with Bitcoin. There are so many parallels, whether it's El Salvador or Bitcoin. So in the bear market, everyone laughs at you. And now, of course, the Bitcoin price is rising again. And suddenly everyone is reaching out to you again.
Yeah, although I have to say it's less than I expected. So the hype isn't as intense as I might have expected when Bitcoin was just floating around. And no one in the real world thought it could ever reach 6 figures. I thought that as soon as we hit 100K, things would really take off, but somehow slowly moving into the bull market. I would say, I think it's simply because it's built up gradually, piece by piece. And if everything is moving a bit slower, then I think the hype also moves slower.
Yes, but on the other hand, it shows us that there's still some room to grow. There's still room for growth for El Salvador and Bitcoin. Previously, during our podcast in El Salvador, I was a tourist. Now I'm an economic refugee. I'm receiving positive feedback as many are considering leaving Europe and Germany. You mentioned that no one wants to build their future on a sinking ship. And I'm also noticing that I'm getting a lot of positive feedback because it seems like this is really a topic that weighs heavily on many people's minds, wanting to leave Europe, wanting to leave Germany. And you actually said that no one wants to build their existence on a sinking ship. What did you mean by that?
What I mean is that we, as individuals, as human beings, are searching for meaning. That's basically the biggest question in our lives. What is the point of it all? And you're trying to find that meaning, to create it, and it takes so much time, effort, and various types of investments to get something off the ground. There are so many people in Germany who have ideas, who have visions, who maybe want to start a company, launch a product, but they are just being regulated away by bureaucracy, taxed out by the taxes, or simply pressed by the mentality. I really notice that we are encouraged not to trust ourselves too much. And on top of that, unfortunately, Germany is sadly on the decline economically. Do we have a functioning government right now? I don't know. Did something just break?
Write in the comments whether the government is functioning or if things are not going so well.
And when you as a person, as a resident of a country, don't have the confidence that what you're building, where you're putting your time, your energy, your money, whatever it is, can last because you're building it in a system that's going downhill, that basically kills every creativity and every vision. And that's what I mean by no one wants to build their existence on a sinking ship. Because when you build something, you want it to last. And that's why I always say that, of course, I have now chosen a server. There are people who choose other countries or other places, or maybe even today in Germany. But it's incredibly important for personal meaning, for the feeling that you're contributing something meaningful to the world, that your efforts are appreciated.
I can only emphasize that because it just feels great when you're in a place And it doesn't even have to be perfect, but just a place where things are moving forward, where you can feel, okay, hey, if you want to do something, you can actually do it. And not a place where, let's say, you're punished for being entrepreneurial and so on. And there we have arrived. And now the question is there maybe some kind of time problem? And what I mean by that is, with Bitcoin, the later we get in, the higher the price. That means the price is basically running away from us. And in the EU, you could maybe say it's similar. That means the invisible wall is being built higher and higher. Now there are things like exit taxes, ETFs, taxed upon exit, and all sorts of stories like that. And many people are asking themselves, yeah, okay, can I, for example, go to El Salvador, or it could be another place? But do you see it similarly to Bitcoin, that the price is running away from us with Bitcoin, and maybe the wall will be closed off in the EU?
That's definitely a scenario you can imagine. And I don't know, so a lot depends on how things develop politically. And as a private individual, you don't have to, but you can decide, hey, do I believe that things will get better here? Or do I think it will get so bad that it will become harder and harder for me to leave? Because this mentality, this political mentality, where you see a problem and instead of solving it, you try to stop people from running away, that's obviously self-destructive. And that's such a, I don't know why that is. Why the broader West is currently heading in this direction, that's extremely tragic. The question is, how much do you trust things will get better? Everyone has to decide that for themselves, but that it's heading in an uncomfortable direction in terms of regulation. We have plenty of evidence for that. So for me, indeed, the answer would be clear. I mean, it's obviously clear we're here now, but yeah, who knows?
I miss the trend in a lot of things. That means, for example, central banks are doing the same thing. Instead of improving their own money, their own product, just shoot against Bitcoin. Or for example, now you could say that Germany, instead of making itself more efficient, is just building the wall higher. And it's the same with a company. I'm not doing Little Hodler either, and then saying, for example, okay, but Hello Kitty is all really bad. You're not spending the whole day trying to bring other companies down. Instead, you're looking to maybe get your own company on its feet better. And then you actually have, maybe you can elaborate on that too, because you actually wrote that we need leaders and not puppets or marionettes. So what does that mean in this context? Do we need leaders again, right? Or should I say, does leadership make a difference? Because apparently something is going better in El Salvador. We also see it in Argentina and so on. There are indeed places where maybe politicians do different things. Things might actually be going better.
I get a lot of hate for this, especially from the Bitcoin community, when I suggest that it would be good to have leaders, because for some people that contradicts the Bitcoin ethos, which I don't agree with. One of the main reasons the president here has faced so much hate, not hate, but so much skepticism, especially from Europe, in my opinion, is that we simply haven't seen a good leader in so long, that when we do see one, we think, oh, they're dictators, when it's just a really good politician. Because this is not a dictatorship. And with good leadership, so much can change. And I'm not an advocate for the idea that the government must go. I think that would end in chaos. I believe the government has a purpose, but we currently have too much government, too much interference. The government has simply forgotten and lost its purpose. The purpose of the government should be to uphold the framework that society agrees upon. Society agrees what is important to them, what rules they want. The government should ensure that this is upheld. The government shouldn't oppose society and set rules society doesn't agree with. The government should do its job and guide the country in a good direction. We don't have that. And if we had that, then we would all be better off. Then we wouldn't hate our government so much. It's completely normal to hate your government. And I can't blame anyone for that, because if you constantly contradict your principles, constantly lie, and just don't do your job, of course people don't like you. If you don't respect people, then they won't respect you back. What you have here is a kind of symbiosis between the government and population, and it's 100% difficult to understand if you haven't seen it, because we almost never see it anywhere.
Yes, and that's true. If you just go to Switzerland, there is actually much less resistance there than, for example, in Germany. And also the whole thing, like, for example, saying to abolish the state, abolish central banks and so on, comes from the fact that central banks have been exploiting the money monopoly for years, or that the state has been abusing its power for years. Elon Musk even put it this way. He basically said it's like having a soccer game where at the beginning we had one referee, but now we not only have 22 players, but 30 referees, and suddenly we have 40 referees, 50 referees, and it's just referees, and then nothing works anymore. And actually, there's a nice statistic that shows Bukele was elected with 89%. And then you see Biden, which is an old statistic, with 38%. Macron with around 18%, and Olaf with 20%. Not so great. Then you also see others like Trudeau and so on. But can you maybe say something about that? Because that's also the perspective always have from the West, wanting to dictate something to other countries. But if we take a look, we're basically throwing stones from our own glass house.
Yeah, no, that's how it is. And I don't know what kind of complex that is. I can imagine what kind of complex that is, but it's extremely unproductive and also harmful. Because the broader West has been trying for the last 5 years to prevent itself from making its own country better, even though it doesn't concern them at all. And this is a system that affects many developing countries. It's hypocritical. Criticize others while ignoring their own issues. El Salvador has made progress, making mockers look foolish. Perhaps we've had it too good, forgetting crisis management and losing direction by focusing on our own issues. And in the case of El Salvador, which has of course made huge progress despite all these attacks, that of course makes the countries that made fun of it and tried to target them look pretty stupid. We just have the problem that I don't know if it's because we've had it too good for too long, that we've forgotten how to manage crises, we've forgotten to deal with real problems, that maybe we've lost our direction because we've reached the top. We've basically reached the top. We had nowhere to go. That means it's going downhill. We've gotten ourselves all worked up over trivial problems that we created ourselves and focused on them, while the real issues just kept growing in the background. And now we have big problems that we can't take care of because we're not capable. Yeah, as I said, you saw that in North Carolina with the bad weather. And you just saw it in Valencia with the flooding. In Valencia, the Spanish government was unable to accept aid from outside. Firefighters from France were turned away at the border for bureaucratic reasons. They were there to help, while the Spanish army, the Spanish soldiers, I think it took them about 4 days just to even show up and help. You also wonder, hey, perhaps the government just couldn't get their one job done.
The YouTube videos, you just had one job. Yeah. By the way, there's also the Little Hodler here. And there's also the princess version of it, of course, from Lina. This is the mom of the Little Hodler. That's right, I didn't mention that before. Mom of the Little Hodler. I said everything, but not a single word about the mom of the Little Hodler. You can also check the show notes below. There's actually a link where you can find these little hodlers along with a small discount code, or you can just stop by our shop directly. And then what's interesting, as you already mentioned, is that you really can't rely on the state. People are choosing Bitcoin to Bitcoin because they say, okay, they want something outside of the state, or they're looking for other means or different ways of living. And now, for example, the question I asked myself, just a random, just for fun question, what would I have to pay you? How much Bitcoin would I have to put on the table for you to go back to Germany?
So everyone has a technical question, like how long would I have to stay there?
I would have to stay for a year? Well, I mean, everyone has a price. I've thought about that too. 1,000?
Well, based purely on my outlook on life, I don't have any at the moment. Unfortunately, I really sometimes I get this nostalgia for Germany, but those are things that aren't worth going back for. Okay, this is really random, but I miss German red cabbage. We have a German restaurant here, by the way. I don't know if you've ever been there. It's called Jägerhaus. That actually looks super German. They don't have red cabbage, so they don't have red cabbage. Whatever. So sometimes I get these urges where I think, man, I could really go for a slice of bread, but like a real bread. Those are all just little things.
Using Amazon, just using Amazon, that doesn't really work either.
Oh, right. But I've lived abroad for so long that I'm not really an Amazon person. But Germany has its beautiful moments, and it's not just about the food. Unfortunately, it's just not worth it, considering that the atmosphere has really gone downhill, and you can just feel it. You will notice this job, the mood when you come from here, for example. Go to Germany, and I just find it so tragic that you can allow your population to become increasingly depressed, to lose confidence more and more, and to just not know where to go with themselves anymore. I find that so sad because you have so much potential, and then we're told, of course, that we're somehow bitter and just getting worked up. Yes, of course, we're getting worked up, angry and upset. And I think that's priceless when you feel a sense of optimism and a sense of purpose. You have that here, and of course you can talk about it now. Okay, you have to negotiate here 1 Bitcoin a month or so.
Well, but in the end, that destroys the pain and suffering compensation.
Yes, exactly. So philosophically speaking, I could be there right now.
And what I often notice is that the people who stay in Germany are often those who still have hope that something will change. So they think, okay, maybe if a new party comes into power, then things will change. Just hold on for 2 more years, then things will change. It's always like the if-then situation. When I grow up, everything will be okay or something. And that holds a lot of people back. Or a lot of people are also held back by constraints. That means, for example, I understand it too. When you're alone, for example, like me, or maybe like you now, none. You didn't take your family with you or anything, so it's much, much easier. Of course, if you have 5 kids or something, the equation looks quite different. So do you see it similarly, that there are these constraints or maybe even an illusion that something might change?
I think that's a very personal question. And that's why I would never advise anyone, if you have a problem with Germany, just leave. Because that would be a very short-sighted recommendation. Because as I said, some people have families, some people might also have a business in Germany, and they don't want to deal with the exit tax.
But then that's also a constraint. They actually want to leave, but they can't, because they would have to pay so much money that they would lose all their savings or life's work.
And some people just like it. But Germany we have a culture, and if you don't want to give that up, that's completely legitimate. Germany has beautiful. And if you don't want to give that up, that's completely legitimate too. That's a decision you have to make for yourself, based on what is valuable to you. That's always just the question. For example, here you have some advantages that you have in Germany. Is it still considered a so-called third world country? It's still not as advanced in terms of infrastructure as Germany, for example. But now for you and me, for example, is it worth it because we see potential and we see the optimism and we want to contribute? I also know people who say we're staying in Germany because we hope that things will change. I also believe that Germany can be fixed. I doubt that anyone is close to that because you would really have to change a lot. But you say, for example, I want to be part of the solution. I think that's completely fair. And then maybe that's your purpose for you. That's why, personally, on a personal level, I can 100% recommend moving to Salvador. But I also know that it's not for everyone. And that's just something you have to do. Yeah, you just have to figure that out for yourself. I'm fed up. I'm personally fed up with this over-policing and the feeling that someone is watching your every move and looking over your shoulder, and you can't force me to deal with that anymore.
Yeah, the thing is, you have to be honest too. Whether it's El Salvador, there are other problems. And that's all, let's say, personal. And just like you said, I've met a lot of people who say, no, maybe El Salvador isn't for me after all, or something like that. So that's completely, let's say, totally legitimate if you come to different decisions. We're not saying, okay, everyone just leave or anything like that. But then, for example, that's also a thing, because we already had that in Germany with the regulation, with the political system and so on. And Bukele has, I believe we touched on this last time, so Bukele has also, for example, said all the Western countries, that's all part of an agenda. So the crime that we see in 2001, and of course also the countries being driven into the wall, that's actually an agenda because they have, let's say, developed business areas or, let's say, crisis scenarios. that means a lot of politicians or parties only benefit from the crisis scenario that we find ourselves in, which means they sometimes don't even want things to get better, because then, for example, they would have to abolish all those offices or something, any offices that are basically just there to solve crises that they themselves have created and so on. So how should we assess this? Is the country actually driving itself into the ground on purpose? Or, for example, the entire West, not just Germany, also, for example, the USA? Or has it just developed in such a way that at some point, let's say, we realized, hey, the bureaucracy has somehow gotten out of hand. We don't even know how we got here, but somehow it's just not working anymore.
I believe that, well, 100% there's a lot of incompetence involved and a lot of inefficiency. And it's just to such a degree. So, for example, he also mentioned in an interview with Tucker Carlson, that interview, he brought up the example of the train route between Los Angeles and San Francisco. Please, it's been under construction for years now, if not even a decade. I'm not quite sure, Stuttgart 21 or the eternal construction site. Being built for billions of dollars, and effectively only a few hundred meters have been completed. And you ask yourself, okay, how could it get so bad? It's a process, and at the end of the process you stand there and think, how did that happen? And what your argument is, or what his assumption is. The question is, where's the truth? But such a level of incompetence can only be achieved intentionally. That was basically his assumption. And I think you're actually right that certain parties benefit from it. Certain parties profit from the chaos. That's just how it is. But because you have such a massive system, as soon as you're caught up in this inefficiency, it just keeps spiraling further and further. And to solve that, you just need someone to bang their fist on the table. But you also have a system that almost doesn't allow it. It's very, very difficult to reach such a level of control, to gain that level of power, which is what it's all about. So it's probably a bit of both, incompetence and being out of touch.
And if you want to buy Bitcoin now, feel free to check out 21 Bitcoin, the easiest way to buy Bitcoin in Europe. With the code Bitcoin Hotel, you can get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin. And to secure your Bitcoin as much as possible, I recommend a Trezor hardware wallet. This way, you can be sure that you're protected from theft and hacking attacks. A Trezor hardware wallet is super easy to use, secure, and even open source. And with the code Bitcoin Hotel, you can also secure another 10% discount when buying a hardware wallet. I'll link you below in the video description to Trezor and 21 Bitcoin. And what I actually wanted to discuss with you is that last time we talked, it wasn't so obvious, but now there has also been the attack from the International Monetary Fund against El Salvador. So how should we assess this now exactly? So the International Monetary Fund means El Salvador is really doing well, I'd say, in the plus. So for a long time, people were saying, okay, Bukele, what is he doing with his thousands, buying 1 Bitcoin every day, somehow having 5 Bitcoins? On the other hand, Germany has sold its Bitcoin. The whole world is laughing at Bitcoin. About Germany, not about Bitcoin. And how should we assess the fact that El Salvador is still being attacked by the International Monetary Fund? But on the other hand, Bukele has even said something like, in 2 years or so, he will be completely independent, won't have any debts anymore, or something like that. So how should we assess the fact that El Salvador is still being attacked, even though it seems to be working?
This is to be understood in the same way as how mainstream media, I think there's now a push to call them legacy media, are still trying to push a narrative, even though no one believes in it anymore. It's a shift. It's basically a change in the control of prevailing opinions. That's natural. The IMF cannot survive if that narrative collapses because its existence is based on the fact that such countries need it. Of course, if the IMF were to admit that this was very smart, then it would be shooting itself in the leg, shooting its own foot, whatever. And that's why probably until its demise, the IMF can't admit that Bitcoin was a good idea unless it does a really drastic restructuring. But I didn't know how that was going to work.
What would you say if you had to criticize El Salvador? Because otherwise, all those people will come back and start commenting, you guys are just El Salvador shills and stuff like that. That's the story of my life. Exactly. So that's the positive side, but we also have to address the downside. And that's also what I've been noticing more and more, for example. At first, of course, you only see the good things, but the longer you're here, maybe it's the same for you, you start to realize that maybe not everything is as great as it seems. I'm noticing more and more. So at first, of course, you only see the good things. The longer you're here, maybe it's the same for you, you start to realize that maybe not everything is as cool as it seems. And then there are also some critical voices. I mean, to be honest, I have a completely blinded perspective. Everywhere I go, the red carpet is rolled out for me. Of course, I'm a tourist, and as a tourist, you always get treated very, very well. What I sometimes notice is that, for example, if you're a local here, you might be treated differently by the police than if you're, for example, a tourist or something like that. But on the other hand, it's the same in Germany. When you come to Germany as a tourist, you're always treated much, much better than if you're a local or something like that. But what can you say about the downside of El Salvador?
Or is there even a downside? All countries. And I've lived in many countries, so I see it a bit differently. But German perspective, for example, would probably look at El Salvador and say, hey, there's a lot missing here. And if you want to see that as a downside, then that would be, for example, a big problem they have here. For example, the prices have gone up a lot, especially the prices in the supermarket. That's right. It's really expensive. And it's expensive for us tourists too. It's not life-threateningly expensive, but it is really tough on the wallet. There are reasons for that as well.
So you keep hearing that, for example, locals are complaining, okay, there haven't been any salary adjustments in schools for 10 years. But I would say that's not just specific to El Salvador. I think that's generally the case for countries that are somewhat dependent on the dollar. I mean, the more El Salvador can perhaps become independent with Bitcoin, the more it might get fixed. Could that be the case, right?
Yeah, I mean, I always find it a bit unfair when people look at Salvador from 10 years ago, when you couldn't live your life here because you were basically getting killed by gang members every day, and the gangs were running this country. And now El Salvador is one of the safest country on this continent. And it's getting safer and safer. And then people come and say, wow, but this is still bad and that's bad too. What do you think? How long does it take to completely turn a country around? Everything here happens step by step. And if you look at how much has already improved, it just takes time. That's such a strange attitude. But it's also something very human to see the hair in the soup. You can't expect everything to be perfect right away. On the topic of Singapore, I think the median, what do you say about the median income? Yeah, the median income is 5,000 Singapore dollars, which is about $4,000. I have no idea, something like that. But they haven't always reached that point either. It took, how long did Lee Kuan Yew lead? I don't know how long he led the country, but he worked on it for decades. It was also an extremely criminal country. They had to completely turn everything around. They had to build everything from scratch on the mud. And step by step, they've improved things there and invested in education. That means if you invest in education, it takes 20 years before you see your return on investment. It's all about having a low time preference. And El Salvador has many problems. El Salvador has a gap between the rich and the poor, all countries. And here it is also very strong. And step by step, it has to get better, but it takes time. And that's why you have tough times. But at least you get the feeling here that work is being done, while in the West, it feels like things are going in the opposite direction.
2001. Thank you for watching up to this point. Let me know in the comments below what you think about the incredibly exciting statements from Lina Seiche. See you next time. See you later. Peace out.